I'm Dr. Candace King with the Village Media. As the United States marks 250 years, Black 250 asks us to look beyond the traditional reductive story of America and critically examine the role that Black people have played in shaping, expanding, and defending democracy. Few periods reveal that struggle more clearly than Reconstruction, which was a historical time that raised questions around political power and democracy that, quite frankly, still remain unresolved today. In part two of our BLK 250 series, historian Dr. DJ Polite examines the connection between Reconstruction and the current redistricting battle. DJ Polite, an assistant professor of history at Augusta University. His research focuses on the mutually reinforcing growth of Jim Crow policies in the United States and American empire in the Caribbean, particularly Puerto Rico. His recent work, Arturo Schomburg and the Building of an Anti-Racist Archive, appears in the Routledge Handbook on Anti-Racism in Global Historical Perspective. DJ, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, I want to just first start by delving into Reconstruction. And so, as a historian, when you're thinking about Reconstruction, how are you defining that period?
So, when I think about Reconstruction, I really think about it as, in many ways, this framing of the second founding of the United States. Um, a lot of what we understand of as the rights of citizenship or the rights of being a citizen in the United States are fundamentally things that are shaped by Reconstruction. Um, Ideas of like freedom, ideas of citizenship, ideas of what are the things, voting rights, all of those are defined much more during Reconstruction than at any point in American history. And so I think when I think about Reconstruction, it is through that lens of the second founding, that kind of framing overall.
Absolutely. And I think that, one of the things that I really appreciate about your essay is that you sort of use that framing to help us sort of make sense of this current attack on voting rights, particularly as it relates to redistricting, which is a move that erupted following the Supreme Court Calais decision. And so, I want to kind of delve into, your essay a little bit and sort of, your approach and how you're thinking about this moment in particular through that framework of Reconstruction, or that history rather of Reconstruction.
Yeah, I think, when I think about the last couple of years, whether it be the Calais decision, whether it be DNC versus Brnovich, whether it be all the way back to 2010, it was Shelby County versus Holder. It is through this lens that voting rights have been under consistent attack, specifically from the political lens and the judicial lens for at least a decade. This kind of this overall, this broader scope of backlash to America's first black president, Barack Obama. It's not in many ways, and I don't think it's a coincidence that we see this big growth of attacking voting rights through the political realm and through the judicial realm, literally within like not even 2 decades, 2 years after America has its first black president. Um, and I think, everything since then has been just kind of a step by step process by which, African Americans' political and civil rights have been weakened a little bit at a time, and I feel like it's accelerating in the last couple of years, and I think that is culminating with redistricting coming out of the Calais decision.
Yeah, and I don't want to spoil it, for our audience who will have to read the essay after this call. But you sort of start off, your essay with this really provocative assertion that rightfully startles a lot of your students. Talking about how folks today do not have as much rights as they did back in the day. So can you just tease that bold assertion out for us? I think, when I was reading it, it really did strike me.
No, I think it's actually come out from, frankly, like how I've ended up teaching my courses the last couple of years, where I kind of start with Reconstruction and end with civil rights, and it's kind of seems like end bow. It's like, we started with Reconstruction where we had this moment of rights, and then it was taken away, and then civil rights, we achieved it, and yet I kind of end with this very provocative kind of question where I kind of walk them through a lot of these recent cases to say, we tend to think of history is this kind of arc, right? It's like, oh, progress comes and it just like comes slowly, and maybe there might be a little bit of a dip, but then it just continues to go forward, and that's not always the case. And so we see the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act as the pinnacle, like the America achieved it. Whatever it is, it has been achieved. Equality, freedom, rights. And yet, all the recent Supreme Court cases have actually attacked whether it be Section 2, Section 5, basic critical
Mm.
components of the Civil Rights or the Voting Rights Act that made it as powerful as it was, have all been weakened. So, how can we argue that we have as much or more rights than we did if all the critical components of the act that gave us those rights have been weakened or chiseled away?
No, absolutely. And, it's actually kind of making me think because I have found that we're finding a return to these moments in history, especially as we're, currently in the 250 anniversary of this country. A lot of folks are actually returning to Reconstruction, which, as a African American studies scholar myself, I have found that people actually ignore or overlook Reconstruction, and just how many gems came out of that period. And so I'm also just curious for you to, just as a historian, what are some of the things that people are misunderstanding about Reconstruction? And in that same vein, and I guess this is a two-parter, what are some of the gems that we can take out from this particular period, especially given the very uh, uh, volatile political moment that we're in that you have laid out for us, in your earlier responses.
I think thinking first about like the misunderstandings of Reconstruction, I tend to think about my own, high school experience where it's like Reconstruction was the three terms. It was carpetbaggers, scalawags, sharecropping, moving on. Like that was the whole of my understanding of Reconstruction coming through high school. And I think even many of my students today is like, oh, Reconstruction is this period where like the country rebuilt after the Civil War in a very tangible like rebuilding of like buildings and cities. And I think that completely misses the point of Reconstruction. It's not just this like rebuilding of the infrastructure of our country. It is rebuilding of what are our actual understandings of politics and belonging and rights. What are they? I think one of the things that's come much more to my attention is, we're looking at the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. It's like we
Mm.
kind of tend to think of them as almost like clear cut. It's like, oh, the 13th, abolish slavery, except if we, go through that comma, except in the instance of, I don't know, being criminalized and convicted of a crime. So we just ignore that comma and the kind of growth of, the carceral state. And then we go 14th Amendment, that gave birthright citizenship and equal protection in the laws. And then 15th Amendment gave African American men the right to vote. But that 14th Amendment is incredibly important, not just because of the birthright citizenship, but exactly what equal protection of the laws meant. What does due process mean? What are the rights of citizenship? And I think if we look at the debates coming out of the 14th Amendment as they were constructing it, most of the politicians writing these laws is like, actually, we don't know what the rights of citizenship are. They were just like actually looking at the paper, like rereading the Constitution. Like, we do not have a clear definition in our Constitution at this point of what are the actual rights of a federal citizenship. They're like, I mean, it's like the right to use the nation's navigable waters and other vague rights. And we
Right.
think today that like the Bill of Rights, those are the rights of citizenship. It's like that actually was not the case. I think there was in like 1830 Supreme Court case. It's like, no, the Bill of Rights only applies to protections from the federal government, but doesn't protect from a state government infringing upon those rights. So we, in many ways, tend to think of the Bill of Rights as the rights of federal citizenship, and that wasn't the case. And so we have to think about the Reconstruction Amendments as fundamentally saying, like, oh, what are these actual full-on rights of becoming an American citizen? Applying the Bill of Rights even more for protections at the state level and the federal level. Does equal protection mean? And those are the debates that are happening during Reconstruction that I think are like the real gems, right? I think
Yeah.
those that is the real gems, um, and at what was really at stake during that period of time.
Yeah, yeah. And, I think that, through your essay, you sort of tease that out beautifully. And, again, not at the risk of more spoiler alerts, just, I guess, in your own vein, what are some takeaways that you would want readers of your particular piece looking at this moment to sort of walk away with?
I think if I'm thinking about takeaways, right, it is this idea that when rights are chiseled away, it is not always that like the full effects happen immediately, right? Um, and I think that's people in bad faith kind of like use that. It's like, oh well, you said that Shelby County versus Holder in 2010 would like absolutely destroy the Voting Rights Act, but look, African Americans were still able to practice politics like immediately after. It's like, yeah, just because like on paper it doesn't have it has an immediate effect, absolutely, but the full effects kind of take time to bake into the system. When we talk about the fall of Reconstruction, the end of Reconstruction, it happens quote unquote in 1877, but there are still pockets of African American political power that is able to kind of linger on for another 2 decades, and
Mm,
then it completely disappears. So we can see the kind of judicial decisions, the political decisions that, in many ways, pull out the rug of rights from underneath people. But I don't know, African American populations can be resilient and they can hold on for a little longer. And so we can recognize that whether it be Shelby County versus Holder, whether it be Louisiana versus Calais, there will be immediate effects. And we saw some of the immediate effects with the immediate attempts at redistricting to limit African American power. But the full effects of things like Louisiana, Calais might not be felt for another decade, another 15 years. And we have to track that. We have to actively counteract that if we actually don't want the worst effects of it to take place.
that's such a very important part, and really sort of underscores the need for urgent and persistent counter narratives and civic action. So thank you for that really salient point. And lastly, just to sort of wrap up here, this is obviously the 250th anniversary, and that's essentially coming out of that. What was really important for us with this BLK 250 project was really to sort of um, tell the story of the last 250 years through Black perspectives. And so, I would be remiss if I did not ask you, as a historian, a Black historian, the Black, what does 250 mean to you?
Um, Man, what does 250 mean to me? Um, I think if I were to try to like put that into words, what 250 means for me, it is just kind of a I don't want to say a watershed moment, but it's a checkpoint, right? It's a checkpoint for actually checking in with what are the values of this country and are we adhering to them? Or are they in need of refreshing? Are they in need of remolding? Um, I think it would be remiss to be like, oh, well, a country that was founded, 250 years ago, like those were the values then, and like we must uphold those exact values for all time. So sometimes they are in need of refreshing, as we can see with Reconstruction. They needed to actually refound or redefine what freedom and citizenship might mean. And so I think at 250, it is a question to, or a moment to question what are the fundamental values that we actually still want to hold on to? What are the fundamental values that we want to reground and kind of set as the foundation continuing forward, and actually, evaluating whether we are actually sticking to the values that we hold, or attacking them. So I think that is what 250
Yeah.
fundamentally means to me.
Yeah, that's so that was well said. Thank you so much, Dr. Polite, for your time today. This was incredibly illuminating. And just for our audience here, we hope that you check out Dr. Polite's really generative essay on thevillagemedia.com under the Black 250 tab. Thank you all.
Thank you.